Good afternoon and welcome to today's Gain Line, and sorry if you're joining us a little bit later than usual. We've had a few technical difficulties, a few handling errors maybe, but we're here now and we're ready to discuss the weekend's action, particularly of course Wales' game against Uruguay and looking ahead for that huge crucial quarter-final match. But it would be remiss of me not to begin with South Africa-Scotland, which has completely lit up this tournament, Simon.
Yeah, as I said, we had a little bit of a false start here in the studio, and maybe the tournament did as well. We had all the controversy and furore over high tackles and officiating, and we've had the rows over games being cancelled. But as of yesterday, rugby really took over. Just an extraordinary occasion in the Japan-Scotland game. Fantastic it went ahead after all the issues they've had. And it was just such a combination of factors. You could see the emotion in the faces of the Japanese players after the tragic events of the typhoon and how much it meant to them. And just the way they played. It was just a mesmerising display of rugby. And you can just... I've seen seasoned campaigners and commentators saying it was one of the greatest rugby occasions there's been. It was great watching it on TV. And it's really, really kick-started the tournament into another sphere now, and it's really captured the imagination.
I guess what a lot of people sort of viewers at home are asking, how good is this Japan team? Are they just a decent side playing a very exciting brand of rugby who have sort of boosted by playing in front of a home crowd, or are they as good as some of these top nations who they're beating?
Well, it was funny, if you looked at their opening game against Russia, it was quite a stuttering start from them, and that came on the back of them shipping 40 points against South Africa in a World Cup warm-up game. Now, ironically, who do they now play in the quarterfinals? It's South Africa. But since that kind of slow, sluggish start, the way they play against Ireland, a huge shock, that result. And just yesterday, Ireland, they gutsed it out to a certain extent, but yesterday, the rugby they played, the speed of passing, the offloading, the support, there's a kind of joie de vivre about the way they play, like an enthusiasm and dynamism, and they have got people out there with real wheels, absolute gas to die for, and they're a special side. Whether they can be physically big enough and physically strong enough to take on the Springboks, we know how effective the Boks can be up front. That's the challenge, but I say what, it'll be fun to watch because you'll have one style of play against a very different style of play.
Have you been surprised by their fitness levels at all? I personally thought maybe that would affect them at the end of that Scotland game. Maybe energy levels drop off a little bit. I
guess the majority of them are professional rugby players. They play for the Sunwolves, who ironically are now being ditched out of Super Rugby. Whether you have to think about that again is fascinating. Over the last day, so you've had people saying, "All right, we've got to get Japan on board somewhere." They even talk about them joining the Six Nations. A weekend in Tokyo and expenses will be okay. I suppose I won't say no to that. But they're an extremely fit side, and they're also, I think we need to say, they're a very, very well coached side. They had Eddie Jones before he went over to the England job. He was in Japan, brought them the miracle against South Africa 4 years ago. Now they've got a top Kiwi coach in JB Joseph, who was some player himself for the All Blacks. They're well drilled, they know what they're doing, their defence is outstanding, and when they get the ball in hand, well, they can rip any defence in the world apart. It's just fantastic to watch.
Well, if any of you out there have got any questions for Simon, please send them in. He's more than keen to answer your queries. And in fact, we'd both like to hear how you're enjoying the World Cup and what your thoughts about the weekend's action. So moving on to a team that maybe didn't show the skill set that the Japanese did, our own Wales.
Yeah, if you look at it, it was a real contrast. I watched the two games back to back, and it was almost like watching a different sport at times, because it has to be said that Wales's basics against Uruguay were pretty poor. Forwards passes, dropped balls, really outplayed to a large extent at the breakdown. Hats off to Uruguay. They're a really gutsy little team, and they gave everything defensively. They were very strong. But Wales blew a lot of chances, and the skill set wasn't what you'd hope to be. Adam Amos, 3 times he had tries disallowed, 2 for forward passes to him, I think both times Hadley Parks, and then one where he sort of went for a spectacular dive and dropped the ball. And it kind of summed it up, and there were spillages around the field. I mean, I suppose you have to say that there was a team that showed 13 changes from Fiji. Quite a few of those boys hadn't played, certainly hadn't started in this World Cup. So it was like the start of their campaign, and when you get those kind of games, you do get rustiness. You know what it reminded me of? It was one of the Autumn International against the Tier 2 side, where you put the second side, almost like a Wales A match. They got it done. They got 5 tries. It's not one they'll remember for a long time, but let's be honest, it's not the game people will remember from this World Cup, whatever happens.
Well, I guess the question is, how worried we should be, if we should be worried at all. I don't know if factors like they say the weather's improving in Japan, so humidity might not be as much of an issue in the knockout stages. That might help us. There's going to be a different team obviously playing against France. Should we be worried at all, or do we just forget about this game?
I think the interesting thing is, has that game yesterday posed Warren Gatland any fresh selection issues? Maybe not even for the starting team, but the bench as well. Man of the match was Lee Halfpenny. He showed again, reminded us that he is such a solid player, and offered quite a bit in attack as a free runner as well. So I don't think he'll start, but it's probably going back to that old issue, him or Owen Watkin as the outside back cover. So that's a decision they've got to make. And the other person I thought really came through again with flying colours was Aaron Wainwright, in a new role for him at number 8. Now, the fact that he's been played there, that's the third different player to start at number 8 for Wales in this World Cup, after Josh Navidi and Ross Moriarty, which suggests to me that they're still not entirely convinced what to go with at number 8. And he made a real fist of it. I mean, it was one of those games you'd see the other Welsh players kind of going through the motions a little bit, and then every time he came onto the ball, there was just an injection, an explosiveness and a dynamism that you didn't really see from anybody else in the field. And I think whatever happens now, I think he has to be in the starting back row for the quarter-final against France. I think Navidi has to be as well, because he offers so much in terms of his work rate, the way he can slow opposition ball down, his work rate in defence, and just his constantly punching above his weight at a consistent level. And I guess then you'd probably say Justin Tipuric alongside them as well. I mean, Tips in the first 2 games was outstanding, and I think he benefits from playing alongside people with big work ethic in the back row. So I think that's the one interesting one for me, the back row selection. But the other good news we're hearing, Sean, is that the players who had injury issues seem to be coming through okay.
We just a few questions coming in. I think you've pretty much answered Gethins, who asks, should Navidi be starting at number 8 for France?
Well, the specific thing about what position is interesting, isn't it? Because you could go with that back row that's played the first couple of games, which is Wainwright, Tipuric and Navidi. But which way round did they go? I think Tips plays 7. But now you've got the 2 options. Do you play Navidi at 6 or Wainwright at 6? And who goes in number 8? I must admit, I liked Wainwright at 8. And I think Navidi, if you think back in the Grand Slam, 6 was where he played. The blindside berth traditionally is the ultimate unsung hero, does all the donkey work and all the graft and all the grit. And Josh Navidi brings that. I wouldn't be surprised if we go Navidi 6, Wainwright 8 against France.
Interesting stuff. Andrew asks, this one's a little bit left field. How good is Rhys Patchell, and should he force his way into the team?
It's an incredible story. He started 3 games of professional rugby outside of the international sphere. I mean, one of them actually was against Uruguay for Cardiff Blues. I mean, and the other one I think was Lyon in the Europe, and then Edinburgh. So it's an extraordinary story that he's out there at all. But what he does offer as a point of difference is his ball carry. And you saw that, I think it was with the build-up to the third Holloman Moss try that was just Lowry dived in the corner. He's got this ability with his power. He's about 20 stone, even though he's lost about a stone and a half during those summer training camps. He's got the ability to break the line. And what he's got then is startling pace for a prop forward. I remember seeing him play as a youngster. He was at Corpus Christi School and then Cowbridge. Moved there in 6th form. Saw him come through the ranks of Wales in the 20s. Played a bit at Premiership level. And every time you saw him, you were just looking at him thinking, there's a special talent here. And it's no coincidence that European champions Saracens have come in and signed him up. They spotted his ability. I tell you what, it wouldn't surprise me in a game against Africa where you might need someone to come on and make a difference as a ball carrier. Carey certainly offers that.
He's certainly, as a Welsh fan, something we haven't seen before, is it?
No.
His sort of skill set at that position. A few more questions coming in. Actually, we mentioned South Africa. There's quite a few people asking us questions about South Africa. Maybe we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. Will asks, if Wales progress to the semi-finals, who would you rather see them face, South Africa or Japan?
I think I'd be generally more confident of Wales beating Japan. I think so. I just think that South Africa have a physicality at the front, just an ability to pummel you, and I would worry a little bit about the scrummage. I mean, the scrum has improved for Wales since where we were in the warm-up games. Wyn Jones has made a big difference, and it's more serviceable now. But the South African scrummage and their line-out, I mean, they've got such depth at second row as well. You never wonder. After what we watched yesterday, I can't believe I'm saying I want us to play Japan, but I just think South Africa are a mean bunch, and they could be hard to beat.
Alison asks, felt very sorry for Holloman Moss yesterday. I think we all did. Do you think he's blown his chance? It's ruthless stuff. This.
I mean, realistically, I think that was always likely to be Hallam's one outing in this World Cup, barring injuries in the back three. It was just one of those days, wasn't it? He did nothing wrong for the first two tries that were disallowed. He ran over the ball fine. They were forward passes, ruled out. And you can imagine then he takes the pass from Rhys Patchell, he's away for the corner. And finally, I'm going to get my try. And perhaps a little bit of a rush of blood. He goes for this sort of acrobatic dive into the corner, one-handed, and out pops the ball. You thought, some days it's just one of those days. And that was the case. But Hallam's a bright kid. He's been through injury issues and disappointments, and he's come back. He'll be fine, and he'll learn from the experience. I don't think he'll do that again.
Well, let's move on to another subject. Let's look at our rivals, our next competitors, the French team. We've had some injury news breaking this morning, Simon.
Yeah, and if you were to pick out two French players who they could least do without in terms of the star figures in that team, you'd probably say the scrum half Antoine Dupont and the winger Damien Penaud. Both young men who have got a real vibrancy to their game and have been excellent in this tournament. And the news coming through is that there's injuries out over both of them. And whenever we play the French, it's when my pidgin French and Google Translate comes into its own. So I've been trying to pick the bones out with the help of our very linguistic editor, Katrin, who've been able to tell me exactly what the reports are saying. And the bottom line is Dupont, scrum half, he's been carrying a back problem for a few weeks now, and he's missed the last couple of days of training, and there seems to be a genuine concern over him making the Wales game. And Penaud, who arguably has been one of France's best players in the tournament, winger, lovely quick feet on him, and give him half a bit of space and he's going to do damage. We hear he's got a kind of lower stomach strain, groin strain, that kind of thing. Doesn't seem to be quite such a concern. But Dupont, yeah, and if he's ruled out, then you probably see Baptiste Saran, another young Frenchman coming through. But I mean, I remember watching England against France a couple of years ago, where Dupont, hardly anyone knew about him. He came off the bench when France were like 20 odd points behind, and he ran riot, And if you give that little kid any space, he will really, really pull you apart. So, Saran's a good player, but it would be a blow to France if they lose Dupont, and a double blow if they lose Penaud. So we wait to hear more this week.
On France's preparations, let me take you back. We were just talking about how some of the Wales players against Uruguay were playing their first game of the tournament, were coming in a little bit half-baked maybe, and maybe that explains some of the errors. And you said it was a little bit like an autumn international. France have not had a game this weekend.
No.
Their biggest test would have been against England. Will they be a little bit underbaked for Wales?
Well, if you think about their World Cup, they've had 40 minutes really where they hit their straps. The first 40 against Argentina, they were like world beaters, and knowing the potential of us playing against them, I thought, of course, this looks a bit scary. It was like the ooh-la-la sacre bleu of the old French teams you used to see, and they were brilliant in that first half, Penaud in particular. But then in the second half, Argentina took control and made France look very average. And I watched France against Tonga, and I mean, obviously Tonga famously beat France in the World Cup once before, and they got really close and pushed them all away and made France very, very ordinary. And they'd really not had a particular challenge since then. And they go a long period of that. When we're hearing all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes, as people say, it wouldn't be a World Cup without a coup d'etat in France or a revolution behind the scenes. There's all talk about coaches losing the players' confidence, talk about the captain no longer being the coach's captain. It's brilliant. Only France could do it. And usually when that happens, they go and win the World Cup or get to the final, So we don't know really what to make of them. But they're going to be a bit undercooked. They really are. And I think the big thing you'd say about Wales are battle-hardened after this World Cup, group stage. France would have been if they played England. They haven't. That was cancelled because of the typhoon. So, give them 10 days on their own. Whoever knows what happens behind the scenes.
And the key thing is we're battle-hardened, but we're also at full strength. Injury news is good from the Wales camp. Yeah,
it seems so. I mean, the three main worries were Dan Biggar, who took a double bang to the head in the collision with Liam Williams in the Fiji game. And obviously there was the sore ankle, which kept George North out to the weekend. And Jonathan Davis took a bang to his knee. I think Jonathan Davis was the one that worried me the most. They talked about his knee being swollen. John's obviously had knee injuries in the past. But we hear that Dan Biggar was out yesterday doing a goal-kicking practice and 80-85% success rate. So he sounds like he's coming through nicely. North, I think it was just soreness to his ankle. And the positive news about John Davis. And we saw just how important he is to Wales in that game against Fiji. The game-sealing try, really, which he set up with a trademark fend and superb one-handed offload. Need him there because we are quite shy in numbers in the centre. And he brings such a lot in terms of his defensive organisation as well. Yeah, so fingers crossed that all three of those come through.
Well, we've got time for a few more of your questions on the France game. Let's have a look here. Fiona asks, an advantage of playing France in the quarterfinal is that you won't have a French referee. I don't know what you mean by that, Fiona. Do you agree, Simon? Do Warren Gatland and his coaching staff analyse referees? Do they look at that?
I think you're aware of them. I don't think the quarterfinal list has been released yet, so we're still waiting to find out who will get that. There are obviously two French referees, Garcés and Poitre out there, so you rule them out the equation. You rule Nigel Owens out the equation. So, you start to look at the other kind of people you get. Realistically, you may be talking Wayne Barnes would be an option. And then there's a whole series of Southern Hemisphere referees like Ben O'Keefe, Paul Williams, Kiwis, Angus Gardner. And what you would be fair to say is that generally you would perhaps have a slightly different mindset when you're going into a game with a Southern Hemisphere referee and are going in against someone from the North. There tends to be particularly a different attitude in terms of the contest, the breakdown. Yeah, so there's certainly a lot of analysis that goes on. And also, generally, you're allowed to meet the referee day or so before the match. So I think, in particular, any concerns or issues that the coaches might have about a particular ref and the way they would look for clarification on that. The scrum would be one thing they'd be obviously talking about. And I think, as well, the speed of ball at the breakdown, because I think Wales, a lot of Wales's key performances have been when they've been ultra physical in the contact area and when they've put pressure on in there. Josh Navidi in particular, fantastic at slowing the ball down. You want to know going into a game, how much you can get away with, really put it that way, And I think you need to also, during that game then, think on your feet. And if a referee is pinging you, you've got to change your style slightly.
Right, Simon. Well, your rugby knowledge is a stuff of legend, but I'm going to test you with this next question from Ian. What happens if the knockout games don't go ahead as planned? For example, we get another typhoon. We can't have a 0-0 draw.
No.
What happens then?
My understanding is that it's different from the group stages, and where it was very clear, if it doesn't go ahead on the day scheduled, it's cancelled, 0-0. It doesn't happen. I think what's happening with the knockout stage is they're giving a 48-hour window, or it's almost like a reserve period. And then if that then is still, for whatever reason, you're able to go ahead of the game, my understanding is you go back to the group stages and you look at who are the best performer at that level, which is probably... But then it's complicated then, isn't it? Because one of those teams might only have played 3 games. Yeah. So how do you work that out? So that could be another one that could run over the next week. But let's hope the games go ahead.
We're starting to run out of time, but let's try and squeeze in one more question. Josh asks, if we're getting ahead of ourselves and eyeing up a semi-final with South Africa, how much of a step forward have they taken in the last 12 months? They're talking about Wales, of course.
I wonder if that's Adams and Navidi asking that question. Well, Wales, clearly have taken a step forward over the last 12 months. When you look at the winning run, 13, 14 games, whatever it was, a Grand Slam, the first time Wales have ever won all of their group matches in a World Cup, never done that before. They are a side that is now in the top 4 or 5 in the world, clearly, and a side that, I think it was Alan Wynne-Jones or Warren Gatland said this week, 240 days away from changing, 240 minutes rather, away from potentially changing their lives. Yeah, they've become a very hard side to beat, but I have always thought that with this current Wales team, for them to be successful, they've got to be right at the peak of their game physically and mentally. And I think obviously against Uruguay, you didn't see that for clear reasons. And I think against France, they will be. And let's remember, they've won 7 of their last games against France, 7 of their last 8 games. So, the omens are good.
Well, it's going to be a long week for us here. Sunday can't come soon enough, but for all your build-up, for all the action, in the meantime, please join us on Wales Online. We'll bring you all the news. Thank you again for joining us today, and we'll see you tomorrow.